All right, so first of all, I'd like to introduce Jessica Ferguson. Jessica is the Athlete Development Coordinator at the Steadward Center. She obtained her Bachelor of Kinesiology at the University of Alberta with a concentration in physical activity and sport performance. And she is passionate about helping individuals reach their sport and fitness goals. Jessica believes everyone should have equal access and opportunity to pursue sport. And with us, we also have Megan Chiselski. Megan has, did I say that right, Megan?
Close enough.
Okay, so Megan has been coaching our para track and field team with the Steadward Center since 2016. She is a former sprinter for the U of A Pandas. Her coaching highlights have included being the Team Alberta para coach for track and field at the 2019 Western Canada Summer Games, coaching a 3-time national champion, and introducing many new athletes to the sport of track and field. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Ferguson, and she will get us started.
Thanks, Jen, and good morning, everyone. I'm really excited that you could all be here with us today for our webinar, Becoming Para Ready. We're really excited to share this new resource that we're launching today that we've been working on for about the last year and a half. Bear with me for one moment here. I don't typically work from home, so perhaps I don't have the fastest computer. It likes to freeze sometimes on me. So I hope that doesn't happen again. I'll share a quick outline with you of what we are going to go through today. Megan's going to do an overview of para-athletics and a competition pathway, and do a little basics on classification and specialized equipment. And then I'm going to share some recommendations from our para-readiness resource. Just for anyone tuning in today who maybe hasn't heard of the Steadward Center before, we are an adapted physical activity and parasport center at the University of Alberta. We're housed within the Faculty of Kinesiology, Sport, and Recreation. And each year we serve approximately 1,000 members who are experiencing disability. These are children, youth, and adults from about 4 years of age up to 99 years of age. We have a Free to Be Me program, which is for kids and teens who are experiencing disability. Adult fitness and recreation, where adults who are looking to be active for life would participate. And then Megan and I are coming from the Athlete Development for Parasport program, where we have a para-athletics team, a para-swimming team, and then I run a couple of multi-sport strength and conditioning programs. Our guiding principles are that living with an impairment is best understood by those living with an impairment. Collaboration in parasport is a really important and critical piece to the puzzle. Athletes are the experts of their own body, so engaging with them and asking questions to understand their goals and their unique needs and how they would like to participate in sport is really important. APA and parasport development should be accessible by all who choose to participate. Our decisions and approaches are informed by research, and our work informs our research. I think that this tool is a really good example of that, where we saw a gap or a need in the community, and we're able to connect with a researcher in the faculty, who I'll speak about a little bit later, to create this really plain language, easy to use tool that's grounded in research. And meaningful inclusion requires communities and individuals be informed about the possibilities. So here I'm going to turn it over to Megan, and she'll talk a little bit about what is para-athletics.
Awesome. So hopefully you all have a little bit of experience with track and field, but if not, no worries. In para track and field, it's pretty much the same as non-para, and we have almost all the same events. So there are a few that are missing, like hammer throw and hurdles, which is okay because I don't really like coaching either of those. So, but other than that, basically the same events and a really like broad variety of people that can participate. We do have one extra event called Club Throw, and that's so one of our extra throwing events. It's at kind of a lower level, so basically before you hit international games, there's not really any rules that ban para athletes that are ambulatory, so not using any kind of equipment from racing with non-para athletes. So that makes it a really easy way to include athletes into track meets and things like that. And again, at like kind of a local or school meet, even athletes racing in racing chairs might be able to join with the running athletes, and that can really help because in especially smaller locations, you're probably not going to have a whole bunch of athletes in racing chairs. So this way you can kind of include them into the sport a little bit more. Can I go to the next slide? Something that's like kind of interesting. So in Alberta, we have about 15% of our population experiences a disability. But then when you look at the side of sports and especially like structured sport programs, we only had about 3%, I guess, of Canadians that regularly participate in sports. So that's quite a big number difference than that 15% who probably who do experience disability. And then the programs that are kind of specific for para athletes or people with disabilities tend to be located in the bigger centers. So there's only one kind of specific program for people with para programming in Edmonton and in Calgary. So we were going to do a poll here.
So I've just launched our first poll.
So we just kind of want to get a sense of where you guys are from and kind of what sorts of programming might be available there, because we know Edmonton and Calgary, just because we're bigger centers, tend to have more options and things like that, but that doesn't mean that, you know, we can't be para inclusive across the province.
Just waiting on a couple more responses. Perfect. Going to end that poll and we're going to, I can share this with you all. So we can see most people today are tuning in from Edmonton, but we do have representation from across the province, it looks like.
Awesome. So hopefully this is relevant to everyone.
We have one more poll that we're going to launch here as well. Just interested in what kind of programming you're tuning in from today.
Something that's kind of neat in Alberta is that the Alberta School Sports Association has added para track and field into like their provincials and things. So I think schools is a really great way to get people involved. So.
All right, perfect. I will end that poll. Share that with you all. So it looks like we have a lot of school coaches tuning in today, which is awesome to see, and we have some from the clubs as well. So thank you for participating.
Perfect. All right, so one of the things that I really like about coaching track is that on the para side, we have a really broad range of people who are eligible to compete. So compared to something like blind hockey or wheelchair basketball, that's kind of a more specific subset of groups. Track and field, kind of almost anyone can participate in some form in it. So when somebody is maybe taking it a bit more seriously or wants to compete at a higher level, they will need to be classified. So I'm going to go over the classification kind of system and what that might look like. You don't need to memorize it or anything, but it just kind of gives you a sense of kind of the diversity of athletes that are eligible to participate in the sport. So there's kind of 6 broad categories, and then athletes are further subdivided into those classes. So the next one. So this is an example. So when you get classified, you get kind of like a 3-letter number code. So if you were somebody who had a visual impairment, you might be what's called a T11. So the T would stand for track. If it was an F, it would be for field. The first number is kind of your impairment category. So a 1 means having a visual impairment. And then the second number is your severity of the impairment. So the lower the number, the more severe your impairment is. So I'll kind of just run through this chart. So as I said, the first category is visual impairments. So something kind of interesting about them is that the folks with the least amount of vision, so the T11s, they will have a guide when they're running, and if they're doing jumping or throwing, they'll have an assistant as well to kind of keep them going in a straight line. But then by the time you get to the T13s, those folks don't ever have a guide, and they actually can compete completely independently. The next group is intellectual impairment, and that's something kind of cool about track as well, is that a lot of sports that are represented at like the Paralympic Games, for example, don't have classes for people with an intellectual impairment. And I think having this class really opens the doors for a lot of people. I'd say about at least half the group I coach would kind of fall into this group. So it's nice that they're able to be represented. They don't have all the events available, but most of the classes do only have like a limited number of events for them. The next group is kind of called like movement disorders. Sometimes it's called like a cerebral palsy class, but that's not the only thing that's in the class. But it will be people who have issues with like muscle coordination, ataxia, things like that. And so the 32s to 34s, those people would be racing in wheelchairs, and then the higher end would be doing running and jumping. And then the same thing, seated throws, and then the 35s and 38s would be doing standing throws. And then the next one is kind of a interesting class. So it's called race running. I think there's a picture of it, Jess, if you can click that up. So this is what a race runner looks like, and it kind of came in and then out, and now it's back in again as an official classification. So that's for folks that don't necessarily need to be in a wheelchair to compete, but also need some support when they're running. So it's kind of like they're on a tricycle, but without pedals. So you sit on the little seat, and then you can push the frame. So I'm glad to see that it's back in, because again, it just opens the door for who can compete. So our fourth category is kind of a mixed bag. So the 40s and 41s, that's for people with short stature. And those folks are limited to throwing events only, but they do have shot put, discus, and javelin, so they have a couple options. The 42s to 44s, so this is somebody that would have some kind of impairment in their leg function, but they don't use a prosthetic. And these folks used to be combined with what's now the 60 classes for people that do use a prosthetic. But they just found that there was actually a difference in performance ability, so they've now split those ones up. And the 45s are for people with arm impairments. So if you're a 45, you might be affected bilaterally, up to a 47 on the track, which would be just something kind of affecting you elbow down, and a 47 would be from shoulder down would be your affected area. For the 50s, again, is quite a broad class. So this is all our wheelchair racers and seated throws that weren't in those 30 classes. And it can really be like a mixed bag, I guess. So some of the people in this category might have experienced like a spinal cord injury or spina bifida. They might be regular wheelchair users, or they might be people that walk around in their day-to-day life but just aren't able to run. Sometimes people that have amputations that just a prosthetic doesn't work for them or they're not interested in might choose to do wheelchair racing or seated throws instead of running on the track. And the last one, which I said, it's the newest category. It only actually started about 2 years ago. And so that's for people who have some type of leg impairment and do use a prosthetic. So again, the 61 would be a bilateral, whereas a 64 would be a single leg below knee amputation or similar. So those are all the classes. I know it's kind of a lot, but in general, especially if you're like in a school, sometimes it's good to have an idea of what those people might look like or who could be involved. I know there's like kind of the more obvious ones, but at least in my group, there's definitely people that if you didn't know, like maybe would be curious why they're doing para-athletics. So they're not the most visible. What I found with coaching para-track is that it's basically the same as coaching non-para athletes. So on our more recreational side, people have similar like fitness and socialization goals. And then up to the high performance end, where you're doing your yearly training plans and all your cycles and things like that. It's not drastically different in any way. The biggest kind of challenges are about equipment, which I'll talk a little bit about at the end. I guess just like the need for ongoing learning and also creativity. So sometimes when, especially if you get to like the weight room or something, you realize there's just things that aren't going to work for your athletes. So you have to come up with some exciting ways to do exercises or teach skills in a different way. I've definitely found coaching athletes with a visual impairment really makes you think outside the box of how you're gonna kind of teach skills. You can't just go back to what you always do because that often doesn't work for folks. And then I feel like I'm always like trying to learn more, especially about like racing chairs and things like that. So thankfully there are a lot of resources out there, but it's, I don't ever think I'll be kind of done learning about all the things that are involved in para-track. Another one is just assumptions and attitudes. I guess this is something that you run into more at meets, and sometimes people don't think that para-track is like as competitive or as important as non-para. And I think that's something that kind of the whole community is trying to change. So if you're going to make like the Worlds or Paralympics or something like that in the para side, it's just as competitive as making it on the non-para side. And it's also, I think, just as important on the other end to support our recreational athletes in para track and field. So kind of this assumption that if you're doing para track, like your goal is the Paralympics, I don't think that's valid, just as, you know, anyone that's doing track in high school or even at a university level, like most likely won't actually ever make it beyond that level. So it's okay to just be participating in the sport and competing at the level that they're at without kind of pushing this like ideal of needing to make a major games. I think the more people that are involved at the sport, even if it's at a grassroots or recreational level, is just going to keep elevating the sport for us. And the last one is advocacy. So I just complain about a lot of things to a lot of people all the time, but just trying to create change. So sometimes it's like really simple things that just get overlooked. Like when I was coaching for Westerns last summer, there was no ramp to get on the podium. So none of the athletes in wheelchairs could go on the podium. And it's a small thing, but it's also something that's just kind of unfair and would be easy to fix. So I think the kind of more you can complain and be the squeaky wheel, the more change that will ultimately end up happening. And I don't know, maybe I'll annoy some people, but maybe we'll make some change too. So kind of what our pathways would look like in Paratrack. So on the recreational side, you're looking at athletes who would join their school team or a local club or maybe specialized programming. And their main goal is fitness and social goals. So, you know, getting exercise, but also coming out to be with their friends and have a fun practice. And they would kind of fit through that active for life stage in the LTAD. So I think that this is a really important part of para track and field. It's maybe not as exciting or kind of newsworthy as the competitive side, but a lot more people are going to fit into the recreational side, whether that's they're always in that side or maybe they go to competitive and return to recreational side when a little bit later on. But I think the more people that get involved and are active and make friends, that's to me kind of the most important goal. On the competitive side, so an athlete would start out basically the same way, so in their school or club or whatever is available to them, but then they'd be training and competing for competitive goals. And the biggest difference is that they would need to get classified, and it would kind of go from there. And in parasport, athletes tend to move through that LTAD a lot quicker than non-para athletes in some cases. So I have an athlete who made a world championships only 3 years after ever starting track, which you probably wouldn't have on the non-para side for a variety of reasons. There's definitely fewer numbers, but it's also that people might be really active and then have some kind of accident or event that they end up becoming para athletes, but they already have this strong sporting background that lets them be competitive in the para sports. So I'll talk a little bit about classification because this is something that's definitely different in the para world. So for almost all competitions, athletes don't need to be classified. So if you're, I know in Alberta in our provincials, they just split it up between athletes who are ambulatory, so who can run or stand when throwing, to athletes who are wheelchair racing or doing seated throws. And what you might have here is like a provisional classification. So it's just a temporary or unofficial class. So it would be kind of your coaches or whoever around like best guess. And generally, you would put someone at the highest possible class. So anyone that is racing in a wheelchair would automatically get put to a T54 because that's the highest level of functioning. And it might kind of go down there if they have a more official classification later. But it's just something to kind of help organize like a local track meet or competition. So athletes that are more competitive, they'll first get a national classification. So to do this, you have to go to a national championships. And when you're there, there's 2 parts to the classification that you'll complete. And then that counts as an official classification for things like world ranking lists or getting carded and things like that. And then the highest level is the international classification. So in order to get that, you have to travel to an international games or track meet. And it's necessary to be able to compete at that international level. Some other parts of the process. So you also need a license for within World Para-Athletics, which is our organizing body. And that, you have to get quite a bit of medical documentation for that. So things like x-rays or doctor's notes or things like that, just to kind of help make sure that you are classifiable. So there are definitely, even though the categories are so broad in track, there are athletes that just don't really fit into one of those areas. And so this can kind of help sort out whether someone will ultimately be able to be classified. And then when you're at your nationals, you see officials, and they'll test things like muscle power, or they might have you do some kind of like range of motion tests or a bench test, things like that. And then they'll also watch you compete and see what that looks like when you're actually racing or throwing or jumping. In general, people get their national classification first, and then they get an international one, but it's not actually necessary to do it. It's just kind of the general pathway that people follow. And like I said, what they do in the classification session, so they'll review your medical documentation, and then they do that kind of physical exam, and then they watch to see what you kind of look like when you're actually competing. And then there's 3 status that you can get. So when you have your national classification, you'll just get a new status. So that means that you haven't been internationally classified yet. And then some athletes end up with a review one, which means that it needs to be, I think it kind of depends. I think most athletes it's every 2 years. So that could be for athletes that are on the younger side, and they think, for example, someone with short stature, they're going to just check how much they're going to potentially keep growing and to see if they still fit into that class. Or some people might have a progressive or a fluctuating condition that's going to affect what their classification is when they compete. So this just means that, unfortunately, you're not just like good to go every year, or how often they decide. You'd have to be reclassified. And then confirmed would be somebody that they just have decided their condition is really stable and they don't expect to see any changes in that. And once you have that, you don't have to be classified again unless something major happens.
Sorry, my computer's frozen again.
Oh, did it freeze? What do we got next?
Did it switch to equipment on your screen, Megan?
It did, yeah. Very good. I think there's a slide before that, though. Yeah, there we go. All right, so the next one, I just want to talk a bit about what competing might look like. So from our top level from Athletics Canada, they support an integrated model. So I think the provinces kind of try to emulate that as well with varying levels. So like I said, the ASAA, so our High School Association, has started including some para events into track and field provincials, which has been really neat. And I think that's a side that has been growing over the past few years. Since I've been coaching, at least, I've harassed enough meet directors to get para events into track meets. And And in general, actually, like meet directors are really lovely and really able to accommodate if you just tell them what you need. And at the kind of Western and Canada Summer Games level, they've also started to include para events in track and field, and I think a couple other sports. At an international games level, what could you compete in para track? So there's the Para Pan Am Games, we just had those last summer, the Commonwealth Games, World Championships, and then obviously the Paralympics. But of those ones, the only one that is actually integrated is the Commonwealth Games, and there's at the Commonwealth Games significantly fewer para events than at something like even the Para Pan Am Games. So it is an integrated team, which is really cool. However, there's a very small selection of para athletes that are eligible to compete there. Just in general, there's very few para-specific track meets and games, and events tend to be quite limited compared to the non-para side. So there's just not as many options. So even for things like Western Canada Summer Games last summer, Special Olympic athletes were only limited to 4 events. The 1, the 2, long jump and shot put. So for anyone that's maybe a special O athlete but likes to run long distance, there's not events available to them. And what they called para athletes was restricted only to wheelchair racing and only in the sprint. So if you think back to that big table of classifications, wheelchair racing really represents quite a small number of para athletes. And I think that's where advocacy is really important. So if you have athletes that want to compete or even just want to be represented, it's important to talk to everyone you can, I guess, about it and say, you know, it's really good that there are these events, but how can we expand them and make it, you know, an equal opportunity? And I think especially in track, when you have the ability for ambulatory athletes to run in the same races as ambulatory non-para athletes, there's no reason to me that they can't just compete in the same races, and that doesn't add, you know, extra events to the schedule or extra admin work or anything like that. And I mean, even for our wheelchair athletes that maybe they do need their own event if you're setting up a track meet, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't get it just because it's a little bit of extra work. And like I said, when I've contacted meet directors in Alberta, they tend to be really able to accommodate and happy to do it. I think you just kind of have to keep reminding people because it's not necessarily at the forefront of their brains. And so that's where, yeah, I just complain a lot and see what happens. And we have seen really awesome change in Alberta, and even with Canada Summer Games, I think Paratrack has really only started, I think 3 game cycles ago. So hopefully in the future, we can just keep expanding. And my last bit will be about equipment. So this can be where Paratrack might be a little bit intimidating or different. Definitely when I started coaching, I didn't know anything about racing chairs, and I'm not sure if I still know much about them, but it's a little bit better. So there's a picture of a racing chair down on the bottom corner there. That's quite a fancy one. And that's obviously what anyone who wants to do wheelchair racing would need. And then you also need a special type of glove to go with the chair. And it almost looks like a boxing glove. It's got a really thick, padded leather front, and that's what athletes use to kind of hit the rims on their racing chair. So the racing chairs and the gloves are probably the most expensive part of Paratrack. So thankfully there's quite a few organizations in Alberta, the Steadward Center included, that you can rent equipment from, which makes it a lot easier than having to purchase a $4,000 chair before you can start competing. Other things that you might need are throwing frames. So that's that picture in the middle. The throwing frames are pretty cool. So there are kind of guidelines for what they need to look like, and like maximum heights and size and things. But other than that, athletes can be really creative in what they want theirs to look like. And yeah, we've seen some pretty cool designs come out. People make their own or get somebody in their kind of local shop to put something together for them. As you can kind of see in the bottom picture there, so some of the chairs have like a post, and that's to kind of help provide leverage when you're sitting and throwing. They also tend to have wheels on back, and that's it easier to move the chair when you're not sitting in it. So you could just kind of tip your chair, your throwing frame, and push it along with your chair. And then you can see in the middle one, there's kind of some straps and stuff coming off. So it's really important to tether the chairs in. So you can use just like regular like tethers with a ratchet strap kind of thing, and like tent pegs to strap someone down. So even before, like if you have somebody that's just like kind of starting to get interested in seated throws, they can just throw from like a day chair, or if you know they don't have a wheelchair, just a regular chair, and you'll just need to make sure that it's securely attached to the ground. So if you're outdoors, it's using those straps and pegging them in. If you're indoors, you can use things like really heavy weights or stuff like that to make it secure. And that's before you have to go out and make this throwing frame, you can just start with that. Some other things that you might run into. So if you have athletes with amputations or limb length discrepancies or things like that, you're going to end up working with prosthetics and orthotics. Hopefully your athlete has a really good prosthetician. They can be kind of a pain sometimes, but it's definitely a kind of a unique learning opportunity to learn about all those things. Something else you might see, so tethers. So that's if you have pairs, their guide will hold two ends of what's called a tether. You used to be able to use whatever you wanted as a tether, and then World Paralympics put out a standardized one that now has to be used in all competitions. But again, if somebody's just starting out, you can use like a stretchy band or a string or a t-shirt. Like it doesn't have to be fancy if you're just trying to get someone started. And then something else you might see is starting support. So not all the classifications need to use starting blocks. And if they do, it might just look a little bit different. So if you have somebody with maybe an arm amputation, they might use some kind of block to hold up that other shoulder or hand. Or they can use them under like a knee or to bulk up the back of a foot or things like that. And there's not really hard rules about what those have to look like. They do have to get approved before they can be used again at like major games. But if it was just somebody competing in your school meet or local meet, whatever you kind of can put together, there's definitely people competing at the Paralympics with like a plywood block underneath their arms. So it doesn't have to be this really intense thing. And yeah, like I said, there is equipment available for rent. So Athletics Alberta, ASAA, or ourselves at the Steadward Center have stuff that we're definitely happy to get out in the hands of people that are hopefully going to be using it. Cool. I think that's it for me.
That was great. It's back to me now. I'm going to share our Becoming Para-Ready resource. So this resource was created by Dr. Tim Konoval, myself, and Dr. Jennifer Leo. Tim had hoped to join us this morning, and unfortunately he wasn't able to make it. So I'm going to share some of the rationale, background behind the resource and its creation. And then we're going to go through something called the 9 Ps of para-readiness. So this resource was really created to help club and school athletics programs support effective integration. And this full resource is available on the Steadward Center website. So I think Jen is going to throw the link to that up in the chat box right now. If you're watching a recording of this and you can't access the chat box, if you Google the Steadward Center, our website is housed on the University of Alberta site. You'll see a resources tab along the top of the screen. And from the drop-down menu, you should be able to select Becoming Para Ready, and then you can access this full resource there. So integration is when separate things are brought together. Athletics is an integrated sport. That means para and non-para athletes training together and going to competitions together. Megan mentioned that events are typically separate, but those athletes will be coming together at competition. That's a little bit different than a segregated sport such as para ice hockey, where stand-up hockey players and para ice hockey players really don't train or compete together. So integration of individuals experiencing disabilities into mainstream programming has been a long, slow process. At Athletics Canada, national policy changes were implemented in the 90s, and we've seen kind of little trickle down or integration happening in grassroots programming. This is something called the top-down approach, which is outlined in our resource. That's when a policy change comes in at a national level and is meant to trickle down to a grassroots or a program level where that integration would actually be seen happening. There's a couple of reasons why this might be the case. Sport clubs haven't been provided with enough quality tools and resources to help them succeed. There's not a lot out there to provide that framework or that guideline. So if you don't know how to implement that policy change, where are you learning how to do it? So we're hoping that this resource will be something that can support clubs to do that. And then with a lack of time, knowledge, or capacity, that can prove to be a really big challenge for clubs as well. So we know that sport clubs are often made up of volunteers. Some people tuning in today might be working through their school or their club program in a volunteer capacity, and our time is really valuable. We only have so much time that we can put towards some of these initiatives that we're taking on. And if you don't already have the knowledge or the skill set to implement integration strategies, then it can be quite time consuming to go out and do the research and pull those resources together on your own. Not all clubs have an individual who's a parasport or an adapted physical activity expert. So again, if you don't already have the knowledge or the skill set, it can be quite time consuming to acquire that, and not every club has access to someone who already has the knowledge. And sport clubs don't all have enough people to coach anyone and everyone who come to their club. A lot of our clubs have very full coaching roles already, and perhaps you have coaches that don't feel that they can take on any more athletes, or athletes with more diverse needs than the athletes that they're currently coaching. So the idea of para-readiness comes from the sport management literature, and it's around the two concepts of organizational capacity and organizational readiness. So the organizational capacity is being creative with the resources that you do currently have. This could be people, could be equipment, facilities, practice times, knowledge of disability, leveraging those resources that you do have to support effective or better integration in your club. Organizational readiness is being ready to support integration or athletes who are experiencing disability in your club. Every club is going to have a different level of organizational readiness, and this resource that we've created, specifically the 9 Ps on the Para-Ready checklist, are meant to help clubs identify what their current readiness is and identify potential steps that they could take to increase the para-readiness of their club. We're going to put a call out to everyone on the webinar today. Let's do integration better. And we know that to do integration better, clubs need to know how to do integration better. So this resource is designed with the 9 Ps so that it can be an organizational readiness tool or a checklist. There's a lot of information on the slides coming up when we start working through the checklist. We don't mean that you have to implement every single recommendation that's on the checklist, because really small changes can go a long ways to creating more inclusive opportunities for athletes to be getting involved in our communities. And the more variety of opportunities that we have available through small changes, the more people who can get involved. So before we get into the checklist, I'm just going to go through a couple of barriers really quickly. We know that there are barriers in promotion. So this is awareness on the website. Something that really stood out to me a few years ago when I saw Dr. Tim Konoval speak at a conference was that most athletics pages are 17 clicks before you land on any information about programming for athletes with disabilities. That's a lot of clicks. You can sometimes get lost in the information on the website. So if there's no awareness that you offer programming for athletes who are experiencing disability, it can kind of draw people away or to not look towards your club for those opportunities. Inaccessible social media and email communications or inaccessible websites. So these are things like having alternative text for any images on your websites or PDFs that are screen reader friendly for anyone who's trying to access the information with a visual impairment. Incomplete information, so maybe you have a program listed but there's no information about the equipment that you have available or if the facilities are accessible. There's limited communication between healthcare professionals, support workers, parents, coaches, athletes. That's a big one for promotion. If these individuals aren't communicating and aware of the opportunities in the community, then athletes never hear about the opportunity that they could pursue. Barriers in programs, cost is a really big barrier for individuals who are wanting to get involved. Accessibility of track facilities, accessibility of facilities in general, washrooms, change rooms as well. Nearby public transportation options. Can athletes take the bus or the train to get to your location? How accessible is it? Knowledge of disability, so having that parasport expert as a part of your club who can facilitate that collaborative process with athletes to find something that works for them and their goals and their bodies. And equipment, like Megan alluded to, is a huge barrier. Racing chairs can start at about $5,000 and go up in price from there. And then we have barriers to building capacity. So you might not have any budget for a parasport coach. What education opportunities are available for them to learn more about? Potentially, if you're in Edmonton, there's a few disability sport organizations, and we'll make sure that we link you into what all of them are so that you can collaborate and do some information sharing there. But potentially, if you're in more of a rural area, there's no sport organization for you to connect with and collaborate with. We definitely encourage anyone to give us a call if you have any questions, but having someone local makes it a little bit easier for you to go visit one of their practices to learn more, or for someone to come out to your practice and work with you a little bit. So there are definitely some barriers that exist. So we have the 9 Ps of the Para-Ready checklist. This is meant to provide a tool or an outline. You don't need to do every single thing on this checklist here. There's going to be a lot of information on the slides coming up. You also don't have to worry about writing everything down. This full table is available in the resource that's on our website. So you might just want to print the table off and maybe just check off anything that you're already doing. You can circle some things that sound really easy to implement that you could implement this week. Maybe you want to star a couple things that you think you could implement this year, but it's going to take a little bit more planning. And there could be a few things on here that your club just doesn't have the capacity to do that for now you might cross off and revisit in a year or two, and that's okay. You don't have to do every single thing on the list to support more effective integration. I'll also say that if you visit the full resource on our website, there's a ton of hyperlinks within the resource. So it's a really good place if you're thinking that you'd like to do one of these steps to increase the readiness of your club. There's lots of hyperlinks that will take you to external resources that can provide you with a little more background specifically on how to do some of these things. So our first P here is policy. Having a para-ready inclusion commitment statement listed right on your website so that when people land there, they can see that you are inclusive to athletes who are experiencing disability, and be as specific as you can. How do you integrate athletes into your programs? So we have kind of a really short example up here. So Joe's Track Club is committed to providing athletics programming for all athletes experiencing disability in our community. Our next P here is promotion. Promotion is your website accessibility. So this is one that I know that we do have a really great hyperlink to check to make sure that your website is meeting accessibility requirements so that everyone who lands there can view all of the material that's on there. Making sure that all of your content is using plain language that's easy for everyone to understand. Trying to avoid the use of acronyms, things like that. Having all of your key content listed on your website. So making sure that it's really clear through your inclusion statement that you do support athletes who are experiencing disability. Be really clear about which disability groups you do support. I think it's a common misconception that to open up your club to be more inclusive of athletes who are experiencing disability, that has to be open to all disability groups. But I think that being really clear about the capacity and the knowledge and the expertise about your club and who you can effectively integrate at this time is completely fair and just creates a better experience for all athletes who are looking for an experience, as well as all the coaches who are in your club. At minimum, you should provide information about what equipment is available, the cost of your program, what the facilities are like, your coach, their qualifications, if possible, even contact information for your coach so that interested athletes can reach out with more specific questions, and your practice times. Social media and emails should all be easy to understand using that plain language, be screen reader friendly. And you want to make sure that all of your images are representative of the diverse range of athletes that are included in your programming. There's a few different awareness strategies that we put down here just to promote your program or create awareness of your program existing. You could run try-it days, have practice observations where athletes can, or potential athletes can come out, observe your practice, meet your coach, engage with current athletes in the program, as well as meet the coach nights. Chances to come out and chat with the coach and learn a little bit more about the program. Our next P is programming. Programming includes access to equipment, so making sure that your program either has equipment or, as Megan mentioned, that you are aware of where athletes could go to rent equipment in the city. So in Edmonton, the Steadward Center, Athletics Alberta, the Alberta Athletic Schools Association, all have equipment that athletes could rent if they just want to try the sport out for a year before committing to purchasing their own. Administrators being knowledgeable about grants that are available to support para-athletes. So when an athlete is ready to make that big purchase their own racing chair or a seated throwing frame, making sure that somebody can pass along grant information to them so they can get a little bit of support to purchase some of those things on their own. Space is a big one. Where are you going to store equipment once you have it? Because racing chairs can be quite bulky. Quite a few of our athletes actually ask to store them at our facility so that they aren't trying to transport them. Maybe they don't fit into their cars. So making sure that you have space available for your own equipment storage, and then if possible, even extra space so that athletes can be storing some of their equipment on site. And equipment should stay appropriately sized and up to date. Ratios of coach to athlete are something that can be a little bit different in para programming. And this is really going to depend on the makeup of your athletes. So in general, persons with intellectual disabilities, such as autism, do require a smaller ratio, maybe 1-to-1 or 1-to-2. This is just related to communication differences where perhaps putting an athlete who's experiencing autism in a large group of 15 and just giving a general directive isn't going to be really successful in communicating what skill you want them to demonstrate. So having one-on-one support to just deliver communication effectively. It could be similar if you're working with an athlete with a visual impairment who has complete vision loss, making sure that you have a guide or some kind of one-on-one support there to guide them through the workout. I think it's a common misconception that persons who compete in wheelchairs will be requiring one of those smaller coach-to-athlete ratios, which often isn't the case. It can be quite successful for racing chair athletes to be in groups of 1 to 5. And then modifications. So opportunities for athletes who are experiencing disability to modify their own practice to meet their unique needs. So participating in that collaborative process with athletes to make sure that we're working towards their unique goals. So we'll continue with programming here. The level of integration, so having lots of options for how folks want to be integrated into programming. This could be training in segregated para-athlete only groups or fully integrated into programming. If you check out the resource, we have a couple of really great case studies in there. One is CalTAF in Calgary, which is a fully integrated program. And then the other one is Megan's program with the Steadward Bears, which is more of a partnership programming where athletes could train in a segregated Steadward Bears para-only group, or they could be training in more of an integrated setting with the Green and Gold Track and Field Club. Co-design, I've mentioned it a couple times, but just being open, communicating with athletes, collaborating with them to work towards their goals and their unique abilities, using that athlete-centered coaching process to co-design that practice with your athlete. And as often as possible, you want athletes to facilitate or join in on the decision-making process with you. I think we're all really familiar as coaches with tracking improvement. So just making sure that we have appropriate benchmarks to record our athlete progress and that the coach is providing continuous feedback on personal progress. That just helps coach and athlete stay connected on how they are progressing and what goals they are working towards together. Our next P is people. People are going to be one of the biggest keys in supporting more effective integration or opening up more integrated programming into your clubs or schools. Coach education is one really great tool to support great people in your programs. So the Coaching Association of Canada has a module called Coaching Athletes with a Disability that we would encourage everyone to take. Another really great method is to open up lines of communication with other experienced para-coaches in the community. Who can you talk to or meet up with or network with to gain some of this experience? I've taken a little screenshot out of the resource here of our Alberta Para-Athletics Network map. So you can check out the resource to get a full list here. We have a few mainstream sports organizations that I've just clipped out, but we also have disability sport organizations. So we have probably about 15 listed on there, and they're all hyperlinked. So you can go right to their websites and look up their contact information and make some calls. Just start connecting with people if you'd like to learn more about what is in the community or what education opportunities there are. And another thing that I'll encourage you to do is join our Alberta Para-Athletics Coaching Facebook group. So this is meant to be a community of practice where we can have a group of individuals who are all either currently coaching para-athletics or are interested in starting to support more effective integration. And as you start to build this capacity in your club and increase your readiness, if you have any questions that come up, Megan's for sure on the Facebook page. We have a few others who have joined. We're hoping it will just keep growing. So it'll be a great place to post some of your questions and just engage in some conversation with individuals who maybe have had some similar experiences that you have had. So you can search us on Facebook, or if you visit the full resource, this is hyperlinked inside of our resource right to the page. Okay, our next P is place. Place is your facility accessibility, so making sure that there's smooth surfaces, doorways are wide enough to go in and out of, you have accessible washrooms, change rooms, ramps, elevators, all that kind of stuff. I would consider taking some photos, or maybe you could film a virtual tour to add to your website so that when athletes are trying to research the facility accessibility features, they're able to really quickly access that and know what the facility is like that they'll be joining a program in. You also want to think about the facility accessibility if you're traveling for competitions. So that's going to be something outside of your current environment where maybe your practice space is really accessible, but now you've traveled to compete at a different track that turns out not to be accessible. So if you can do that research ahead of time, find out what their facilities are like and any barriers that you may face regarding the facility itself or transportation, and create a plan for how you are going to get around those or manage some of those barriers. We'll just kind of set everyone up to have a really positive competition experience. You want to make sure bus stops are close to the facility that you are operating your regular practices out of, and that there's accessible parking available for anyone who's going to be driving. So the biggest take home with place is just planning and being really thorough in your planning and thinking through lots of different options and lots of different needs that individuals may have when coming to visit your program. So our next one here is pathway. Para-athletes can have often a really unique pathway into parasport. There's a chance that individuals later in life are entering programs at a grassroots level. They may move really quickly through pathways, often skipping entire steps that maybe athletes would typically move through. They can fast track into high performance sport quite quickly. So just ensuring that athletes have support to pursue whatever their unique pathway is, whether they want to just develop and be healthy, fit, or whether they're looking to be competitive or perhaps a mix of both. When applicable, ensuring that athletes have support to classification opportunities if they need to be classified to compete at a particular level of competition they'd like to attend. And it's important to make sure that athletes of similar abilities are practicing together on a daily basis at your practices. Also thinking of other opportunities that athletes experiencing disability can be involved in your club. The more diverse that our boards are, fundraising boards, whether athletes can be coming out to act as officials, if you need some more of that one-on-one support in some of your programs, could you get an experienced athlete, an athlete who's experiencing disability, to come out and act as a volunteer coach? They can gain experience as board members, as coaches, and then in turn your club has a really high level of support that it needs, and you have some diversity on your boards, which is a positive thing. Our next P is price. Cost is a really big barrier for a lot of folks. I think especially as we think through our current economic climate in Alberta, cost is going to be a really big thing to try and be aware of moving forward, keeping program costs as low as we possibly can while still being operational. Administrators being knowledgeable of grants that are available so that folks can maybe connect with some external funding sources to help offset what your program cost is. And there's a few specific things that you can do to lower program cost. So I had mentioned on the previous slide, if you need some more one-on-one support in some of your programs, can you engage with athletes in your club who are looking for volunteer experiences? We're really fortunate that we're housed at the University of Alberta. Megan is often able to connect with varsity track athletes who are looking for some volunteer experience. They have a lot of experience in track and field. They can come out and support the program. They build their resumes a little bit, and Megan's able to deliver some really good quality track and field coaching. And collaborations, I think collaborations are going to be really important moving forward. So we have an example listed here of collaborating with facilities to reduce your cost. Could you collaborate with other clubs so that a couple people are sharing a facility and splitting that cost? Could you collaborate with clubs to share coaches perhaps? So just different options of the ways that you can leverage resources you have to help others, and maybe they have resources that would help you. Our next P is partnership. So partnership with disability support organizations or other programs similar to that collaboration piece of maybe collaborating with track clubs in your area. I would just make some calls, find out what's in your community, what already exists, what things are out there that maybe would help you in your programming, and then also what things do you have that you could help others out with. In our resource, we have a lot of disability support organizations listed that you could reach out to who may even have tools or training sessions, PDFs, things online that could even be free. We all have time right now to be doing some professional development that could help you build some capacity around that knowledge of disability, thinking ahead to increasing the readiness of your club. Okay. So those were our 9 Ps. I know that that was a lot of information. Like I've mentioned a couple of times already, the intention isn't to do every single one of those points or do them all perfectly. It's just to give you some ideas of different things that you could do to increase your readiness and create more inclusive and integrated programs in para-athletics. You may fall anywhere along this continuum here. We have getting ready and then we have total readiness. And there's lots of different places that you can fall along the continuum, and that's totally okay. We are going to put a para readiness challenge out there to everyone who's tuning in today. And we'd like you to share it with us as you start to build some of this capacity or readiness in your clubs. Feel free to tag us on Facebook or Twitter. We'd love to see what you've been getting up to and how this resource has helped you today. You may be a connector where you aren't offering anything yourself, but you have gone out and done the research and you know what's available in the community, and you can connect athletes who are experiencing disability to the resources that they need. Maybe you're a contributor where you're sharing some of those resources, or you're connecting with other clubs, you're forming some of these partnerships to increase what's being offered. Or you are a collaborator, so you're offering some para programming, you have links to all this information on your website, and there's a really clear pathway for how athletes who are experiencing disability can move through programming. So I am going to just launch. We have one more poll here. I'm sorry, I can see that we're a little bit over time, but I just have 2 poll questions and then we'll wrap up for today. Going to launch the poll here. So just interested to know how likely you are to take some of the information you learned today and implement it into your programs. Awesome, we'll just give you a couple more minutes, wait for a few more responses to come in. All right, we'll end that poll. I'm really excited to see that most people are likely or extremely likely to be implementing some of these into their programming. So I'm happy to see that those resonated with you. And then I'm going to launch one more question. So thinking of those 3 levels that are on the screen there, I'm just interested to know where you are right now. Right, we'll just wait for a couple more to come in. Awesome. And we have lots of connectors out there, which is really great to see. We have a few collaborators and contributors. So that is everything that we have for you today. Thank you so much for joining us. I have some contact information up on the screen here. This is my email address, and then I've also listed our Twitter and our Facebook. I'd like to give a special acknowledgement to the Edmonton 2001 Legacy Foundation. Without their support, this resource really wouldn't have been possible. Thanks for joining us. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out on Facebook or email. We would love to connect with you all. With that, we will sign off. Thank you so much.